Dr. Greer, has UFO secrecy been ruthlessly enforced by our government? And if so, why? Why would the government need to be so secret about it if it indeed is happening?
Well, the secrecy has to do with the technology behind how these UFOs operate. And back when the secrecy first started, let's say in the 40s, in that era, the secrecy was because they didn't know what the heck they were dealing with, and that was understandable. By 1954, this is a very important date, October 1954, which is a year before I was born, and I'm no spring chicken, we had mastered what's called gravity control. Electromagnetic gravitic systems, or so-called anti-gravity, is how pop culture would say, would describe it. And actually, up until that point, in the literature, aerospace literature, there was open discussion about anti-gravity, UFOs, things of this sort, and then it went black. And the reason it went black in that era is that the financial cartels, mainly, did not want people to understand that we have not needed oil or gas or jet engines or these things for decades. So this is really a technology story. It has very little to do with little green or gray men out there. And so what began in that era during the late Truman and Eisenhower period was a structure of secrecy called unacknowledged special access projects. And I'm sure that you as a military guy may have come across these or heard of them. And
I don't think so.
Well, the unacknowledged ones are off the books. They are not acknowledged to anyone who's not in the compartmented operation, and up to and including the President of the United States. And this is something we can actually prove, and it's a terrible breakdown in our constitutional oversight system.
So what you're saying is that the reason they're hiding this from us is because the technology's there that we wouldn't need the fossil fuel industry?
We would not, no, we do not need oil, gas, or coal, or nuclear power, or centralized utilities, and have not needed them for decades. So you're talking several $100 trillion in assets that would be impacted by the disclosure of the fact that we're not alone. Because the very first thing any physicist is going to ask is, how did they get here? And when they ask that, if they look at this seriously and look at this, for example, this documentary, Unacknowledged, is the #1 documentary on iTunes worldwide this year and on Netflix, what you're going to find is that this has been known and studied for 70 years, and that the technologies have gone through many generations of development. So the whole charade about global warming and what do we do about it, and et cetera and so on, the solution is there, but the problem is people don't want the solution to come out because it will terminate hundreds of trillions of dollars in oil, gas, and coal wealth, and the petrodollar system that the whole world has developed around macroeconomically since Bretton Woods and after World War II. So this is a huge problem. It has very little to do with the fact that there's intelligent life out there. It's a human problem of the abuse of power and the secrecy that has devolved into these unacknowledged special access projects, which are really rather frightening in how they operate.
Talk about the historic files you've uncovered. What do these files reveal?
Well, for example, in the movie Unacknowledged, we have an Air Force intelligence officer who admits that he worked this issue, an Air Force Office of Special Investigations officer out of Kirtland Air Force Base, and that we have facilities in Nevada at the Lockheed Skunk Works and elsewhere where we have essentially reverse engineered these extraterrestrial craft that we have obtained and studied for many decades. And the military part of it is really the lesser part of it at this point. It's more the overall intelligence community and the corporate and financial community that wants to keep this secret. Most of the high-ranking officers I've met with would love to see this disclosed properly. But I think that, including generals and admirals at the Pentagon, and I think that we're in a situation right now where you have the tail wagging the dog. But one of the cases that really struck me as extraordinary, that it was admitted, it's actually in the book. There's a book that accompanies the documentary, and the book is the same title, Unacknowledged. And as you know, a book contains a lot more information than a documentary can. What you find in that one account from this Air Force officer is that we were test flying one of these retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles, but we had switched out the power plant. We didn't quite know how theirs worked, with something that had a nuclear component. It malfunctioned outside outside Houston, and it's called the Cash Landrum case, and it irradiated all these innocent civilians on the ground as it was going down. And this Air Force officer, Doty, who was the principal investigator of this crash landing, was actually the debriefer also of the pilots, the human pilots of this object. And it came out of Nellis Air Force Base, what people call Area 51, although that's not the proper name for it. And this was a case where these civilians were critically injured with spewing radiation out of this craft. And it was covered up by the government. They tried to sue for it because there were military helicopters trying to escort this thing down that eventually did land after this core breach of the nuclear system on board. But this is a case now where we have a long-standing officer in the Air Force, a career man, admitting that this happened. He was the principal case. Now take that case, and I have 850 military and intelligence and corporate people like him in my archive now.
How high up do these black ops space things go within our government? How high do these projects go?
Well, it's a very good question. It really depends on the person and not the structure. So I'm going to say something here that's a little shocking. It really doesn't matter if you're the president or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It matters if you're willing to go along with the agenda of the secrecy. And here's what I mean by that. I'll give you one great example. Some years ago, I briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. So he was J2, I'm sure you're familiar with that system. And it was a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon. I had astronaut Edgar Mitchell with me in attendance, and some of our military contacts who had handled these cases all the way back to the Eisenhower years. I had given the Admiral a secret document from the National Reconnaissance Office, which runs all the secret spy satellites, that listed the code names and code numbers as of the early 90s managing this issue. He actually recognized one of them and contacted one of those compartmented operations. When he got hold of them, he was told, "Sir, you do not have a need to know." And he says, "God damn it, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff." And they said, "Sir, we will not discuss this with you further," and hung up on him. So it's a very big problem. So have there been people in J2 who have been read into this or briefed on it? Yes. But this particular man, they did not want to know because they didn't think he would go along with the agenda. And the same thing was true of General Patrick Hughes, three-star general that I briefed, who was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, I sat with him in his offices. He had made specific inquiries of actionable intelligence we had given him. He was denied any information. In fact, he was just ridiculed. And he told me that people on his staff wouldn't tell him, and he asked me why. I said, "Well, what would you do if you found out there was an illegal criminal operation going on within our government, much bigger than 1,000 times bigger than Watergate, and that was keeping from the public the things that would make our world an incredibly, beautiful place without pollution and poverty within a generation?" He says, "Well, I wouldn't stand for that." He said, "I would uphold the Constitution." I said, "Yes, you would, and that's why they're not going to tell you a damn thing." So it has very little to do, Governor, with your rank. It has more to do with whether, I call it, they do a soul biopsy. I'm a doctor, I'm a trauma doctor by training. And so I say they actually do a deep analysis of your psychology. Are you going to go along with this or not? If the answer is a chance of not, I don't care if you're the director of the CIA. I sat with R. James Woolsey, Clinton's CIA director, for almost 3 hours, and he and President Clinton made specific inquiries into this issue and were denied access. And now, he later tried to cover up that meeting. Because I always say, in Washington, how do you know the lawyers are lying? Their lips are moving. But I'm sorry to say that. But
I don't feel so bad today when I did conspiracy theory when I'd get turned down. Geez,
yeah.
I'm in pretty good company, aren't I, for people that can't get questions answered by the government.
Exactly, exactly. And you're now talking about the director of the CIA, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the head of Intelligence Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of whom I have privately briefed, not to mention members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, et cetera, and so on. So what you find with this is that it really has very little to do with your rank. It's whether you're willing to go along with the secrecy. Now, are there senators who know? Yes, Senator John Warner of Virginia was a member of the committee handling this. Would he admit the existence of these programs to fellow senators? No, he would not even in his own party. Now, I know this for a fact because I am friends with his son. So I think that this is a very complex story. We try to sort of touch on it a little bit in the documentary and more in the book, which you can get at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, what have you. But it's a story really not so much about life in outer space, which most people assume there's intelligent life out there. It's how we have misfired in our civilization for the rule of law, the Constitution, and what have you, has just been swept aside by people desperate to keep this secret to protect their power. It's all about power.
Yeah. Just to have some fun here at the end, though, I got to ask you. So extraterrestrials have made contact with us?
Yes, there have been events where they have, well, we have 4,000 cases where they've landed on the ground. And for example, the case in Bentwaters, the Air Force Base in England, there was a craft that landed that was basically a pyramid-shaped object, and there was contact between the U.S. military officers there in England at RAF Bentwaters and the extraterrestrials on board. So that has happened. It's well documented. We have their case histories. We have tape recordings of the officers who were there talking about what happened. We have their videotapes and their testimony. In fact, we have so much evidence that it's sort of outrageous that, you know, this is not the first thing that you see on CNN and the Washington Post and New York Times, but there are two. One of the things, if you look at the movie Unacknowledged, you'll see that the media is a big part of the problem. The media has very systematically covered this up at the request of the IC, the intelligence community.
You know, I don't get it. Couldn't they still cover up the fact that the fossil fuel industry would still exist and still let us know that there is people beyond our Earth, that there's an intelligent source and that we know about it? We're not capable of understanding that. I mean, these people ain't no better than me.
Well,
and I've been on
yes.
both sides of the fence. I've been a governor and a mayor, and I've been a regular citizen and military.
Right, right.
I can handle it.
Yeah,
Why don't they give me the benefit of the doubt?
Well, because they're afraid of two things. One, the scandal of how this has been kept secret would just shock people, frankly. We don't have time to go into all the murder and mayhem that has occurred. I can tell you that there are 3 people on my team in the early days who were assassinated trying to get this information out through me. I will also tell you that the fact that the ETs, these civilizations are watching to see if we want to grow up or not. They're not going to land at the Super Bowl. They sort of had the whole prime directive thing. You know, they're waiting to see if we, get half a clue before something massive happens. However, if you were to acknowledge that they're here in near-Earth orbit even, let's say that they would say, oh, well, we detected an interstellar vehicle in our solar system. Well, people are going to ask, how did it get here? And that's the end of oil, because I can assure you that as soon as the mainstream media and science community ask that questions, they are going to, if they start digging into this, they're going to find out how those things operate, because this is virtually an open secret. It just is unacknowledged.
You know, I got to tell you, Doctor, one of my favorite films of all time is the original The Day the Earth Stood Still with Gort.
Yeah, I agree. It's awesome.
And I mean, I watched that film, and what you talked to me today about tells me that that wasn't so far-fetched after all, was it?
Exactly. And in fact, the way that we responded to their presence, I have been told that there are people in our State Department who assisted in the making of that film as a counterpoint to the dysfunction that was going on inside the military-industrial complex. And this is why Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex. And Eisenhower was a 5-star general. So I think that film actually was made in response to that.
Well, Dr. Greer, thank you. I'd love to have you back on. I could listen to you all day, tell a story. So
Great.
thank you, and thank you for coming on RT.
Thank you.
We're having difficulty getting guests now, and I appreciate it that you come on.
Oh, I'll speak to anyone who has an open mind to listen. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist. And today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled Planet X and Increased Volcanic Activity. Now, there is overwhelming evidence that several stellar cores belonging to the Planet X system have made Earth their host. And you may look at article 243 entitled Earth Hosting at Least 3 Planet X System Objects for more details on that. Besides direct observational evidence, even with the chemtrail program and sun simulation system making observation difficult, there is also irrefutable evidence from the unprecedented ocean recession events which have occurred around the world. One such event in Russia was followed by a volcanic eruption just north of the coast, where this ocean recession event occurred, suggesting a connection between the ocean recession events and volcanic eruptions. This should not be surprising, as the Planet X object's effects on the Earth can be understood to cause both types of events as a result of their energy-draining effect on the Earth, which is directly connected to their gravitational effect on the Earth. And here we see a photograph of that ocean recession event that occurred on Sakhalin Island, just off the coast of Russia, so belonging to Russia, on March 20th, 2018. And you may look at article 188 entitled What is Causing the Ocean to Recede All Over the World for more details on that. And here is a photograph of the EPCO volcanic eruption. And this volcano is in the Kuril Islands, also belongs to Russia. It occurred the day after the ocean recession event. And if we look on the map, the ocean recession event occurred here, and this is where the volcano is. So this is very close. Now, an ocean recession event is a tidal event requiring the presence of a massive object very close to the Earth, which is thus able to exert a differential gravitational force on the Earth's oceans. Thus, ocean recession events indicate that Earth is being affected by additional massive objects very close to it. Now, the normal tides on the Earth are caused by the Moon, and the Moon, even though it's so much less massive than the Sun, exerts a much stronger tidal effect on the Earth because it's simply so much closer. So in the same way, stellar cores that have a very weak gravitational effect on other objects, when they come very close to them, will exert a very strong tidal force, which is a differential force. And that means that it's very strong right underneath the object, but it's very weak anywhere else. So it has a strong effect on the ocean, very close to the object or in line with it, because it will have the same effect on the other side, but just a little bit further away, it will have just about no effect. And now these objects, the stellar cores that are now being hosted by the Earth, will also have an effect on the atmosphere. They will draw the atmosphere towards them, thus causing extreme low pressure regions and thus extreme storms. And I detailed on that in article 255 entitled Planet X and Worldwide Severe Thunderstorms and Flooding. The stellar cores with their low gravitational influence will and that is due to gravitational energy depletion. They are low on gravitational energy, which they generate in their core. They're no longer able to do that. So they expected to, as I said, exert a weak gravitational force on the Earth. But they will exert the tidal force, as I explained, if they come very close to Earth. So the fact that we are seeing these tidal forces in the fact that we have ocean recession events, so extreme low tides, means that these objects are indeed coming very close to the Earth. In other words, they are being hosted by the Earth, because once they make an energy connection, start drawing energy from an object, they're not likely to ever leave that object. They will simply continue to draw energy from it. The Planet X objects are objects that, as I said, are no longer able to generate this energy. So they will cause the Earth to lose energy, and therefore the Earth to lose gravitational influence on its own matter and on other objects. And you may look at Article 250 entitled Planet X Causing Earth to Move Away from the Sun for more details on this mechanism. And here we see one of the stellar cores hosted by the Earth. It was scored by JFP in early March of 2018. And the object did not move across the sky but remained in the same position for an extended period of time, as stellar cores are known to do in the Sun's atmosphere or corona. And you may look at Article 243 entitled Earth Hosting at Least 3 Planet X System Objects for more details on this object, and also the other two I showed the observational evidence for. Now, the stellar cores are known to connect and draw energy from their host celestial object, as I mentioned. So the ones hosted by the Earth will draw energy from the Earth, and this will have two effects on the Earth. One, the rate at which energy is generated in the Earth's core increases, and thus energy flowing out of the core increases as well, which in turn will cause all of Earth's layers to heat up. And this is illustrated in this image. So as the stellar core draws energy, more energy is generated, more energy flows out of the core, more energy flows through all the layers in the Earth. Thus, all layers will heat up. The temperature will increase at every layer. And this means that the temperature of this molten layer of the Earth, the Earth's outer core, will increase, and that will mean that it will expand. It's liquid, it will expand, and that means that it will be under increased pressure, and this will lead to more magma flowing out from that layer towards the surface, thus leading to increased volcanic activity. And the second effect is that the Earth's gravitational energy inside its particles will decrease, and so will its gravitational influence on its own matter, resulting in the Earth expanding. In other words, Earth's gravitational field will weaken and decrease in size, leading to its matter being less pulled towards the center of the Earth, which will result in the Earth expanding in size. But a liquid will expand faster than a solid, so Earth's liquid outer core magma layer will expand faster than its solid layers, and this will result in an increase in pressure on the magma, which will also lead to increased volcanic activity. And here we see the Earth's liquid outer core, which will increase in temperature. It will expand, and it will expand faster because it's liquid than the solid layers, so it will be under increased pressure. And now there's evidence that the Earth is experiencing increased volcanic activity from the fact that we have this eruption in Hawaii, which shows no signs of abating, but actually seems to be getting worse as the magma is flowing faster. Actually, we would call it lava once it is flowing on the surface of the Earth. We call it magma in the interior of the Earth, call it lava when it's above the surface of the Earth. Now, faster flowing lava is an indication that the magma rising up is hotter, and thus coming from deeper within the Earth. Hotter magma has lower viscosity, or is more liquid, and can thus flow more easily. Cooler magma has higher viscosity, or is of a thicker consistency, and will thus flow slower. The fact that magma continues to flow from deeper within the Earth shows that the magma is under increased pressure due to increased temperature and also the pressure as a result of expansion, and thus may have found an unblocked pathway to the surface through the Hawaiian volcano. And since the pressure deep within the Earth is said to continue to increase, this may mean that this eruption will never end but will continue to get worse over time. In addition, 2 more volcanoes erupted on June 16, 2018. The first was the Sakurajima volcano in Japan, which erupted at 7:19 a.m. local time, and this resulted in pyroclastic flows, that's lava flows, along the volcano's southwest flank, and also in an ash plume which rose 4.7 kilometers above the Minamai Dake crater for the Sakurajima volcano. And this led to significant ash falls on the nearby city of Kagoshima. And here we see a photograph of that eruption. And the other volcano to erupt on that day was the La Cumbre volcano on the Fernandina Island, which is part of the Galapagos Islands. We can see it here. It resulted in lava flows into the ocean and clouds of gas rising up to 7 kilometers above the island. You can see that here as well. We can see the lava. You can see some of the red, which indicates lava flowing towards the ocean there. And here we see the Galapagos Islands, and the Galapagos Islands are about 1,200 kilometers or 745 miles off the coast of Ecuador, so off the coast of South America. As the stellar cores hosted by Earth increase in energy, their gravitational influence will increase, and so will their ability to drain energy from the Earth. This will mean that the effect on the Earth will increase as a result. All of Earth's layers will therefore experience a faster rate of temperature increase, and Earth's gravitational field will decline increasingly faster, leading to a faster rate of expansion and thus to continually increasing volcanic activity. This would most likely result in volcanic eruptions that would never end, which may be what is occurring in Hawaii already. In conclusion, the fact that the Earth is hosting several members of the Planet X system of stellar cores, which will have a draining effect on the Earth's gravitational energy, thus causing Earth to heat up and expand, is expected to result in ever-increasing volcanic activity and also to an increase in fissuring and sinkhole formation. Signs of these effects are already apparent. And here are the references. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist. And today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled The Seals of Revelation, Seal 2. Now, in Revelation chapter 6, we are told about the Lamb of God, which is identified as Jesus Christ, who opens 7 seals on a scroll. As he opens each seal, different colored horses appear, which seem to represent several destructive processes which are unleashed upon a certain portion of the world. Several of these unleashed destructive processes fit a lot of events that seem to have happened and are still happening in the world. So it is understandable if one were to ask if these seals have already been opened and if they have already been unleashed upon the world. In this article, we will look at what seal 2 is likely to entail. Now, in Revelation 6, verse 3 to 4, we read, "And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, 'Come and see.' And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword." Now, once the seal is open, a red horse appears and power is given to it to take peace from the earth and cause people to kill each other. And therefore, the release of this horse seems to bring war to the earth. Now, war on earth is nothing new. Wars have been igniting all over the world for thousands of years. These wars were fought because the parties opposed each other in such a way that they resorted to going to war with each other. However, in the last 17 years since the false flag event of September 11, 2001, a lot of wars have ignited and are still ongoing due to a so-called war against terrorism. But the terrorists seem to be, in fact, financially supported by the Western governments that claim to be fighting against them. So this seems to be a case of a war which is purposely manufactured to destroy and displace people from different regions around the world, as these wars have killed and displaced millions of people. This has also led to a large number of immigrants being allowed into and even encouraged to invade European nations, thus causing a lot of distress for the people of those nations, thus suggesting the existence of a very involved plan to affect many peoples and regions of the world. And now the policy of sponsoring a war by selling arms to one or two sides of a conflict, or even to incite a conflict so that arms can be sold, money made, and also leading to destruction of nations and peoples, is not a new strategy of the spiritual being ruling this world from the shadows. One such example played out during the First Gulf War, also called the Kuwait War, but upon close examination there seems to be a deeper strategy at work. During the Cold War years, Iraq was an ally of the Soviet Union, but in 1980 Iraq invaded Iran and started the Iraq-Iran War. Then in 1982 Iran began a counterattack. At that time the US started supporting Iraq by removing them off the list of terrorist supporting nations and started selling them military weapons. By the end of the war, Iraq was deeply in debt to mainly Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and appealed to them to forgive their debt, but they refused. Instead, the two countries exceeded their OPEC quota for producing oil, which led to the oil price dropping, which then placed Iraq in even greater financial difficulty. This seems to be a primary reason for the Kuwait War. In other words, this looks like a well-executed plan in which money was made by selling military weapons to a country which was also befriended for that purpose, and also to create another war with another perhaps desirable result for the puppet masters, which was the weakening of the nation of Iraq. This weakening possibly made Iraq an easier target during its invasion by a Western coalition headed by the US, which led to some 600,000 Iraqis being killed. And the war is still ongoing as the newly installed Iraqi government continues to battle various factions. So here we definitely see an example of men killing each other. But we also see money being made from selling arms, a nation weakened, more war is then incited, a nation is destabilized so that war is ongoing, creating a need for immigration, which then leads to the destabilizing of people living in many of the nations that fought in the war against the Iraqi people. This suggests a very sinister plan to destroy many peoples. Now, in addition, the ongoing conflicts that have started since the September 11, 2001 event, which then led to a good excuse to go to war and has also led to terrorism flourishing to a degree never seen before, are extremely numerous. As mentioned before, war in Iraq is ongoing. It started in 2003. War involving various nations in Africa in the region of the Sahara Desert, which we see here in this map, as you can see. Many nations are in this region, the Sahara Desert. And this started in 2007 and is ongoing. This war is against Islamic militants and drug trafficking. Western nations involved are the US, UK, Canada, France, Germany, Netherlands, and Spain. And here we see where Iraq is between Syria and Iran. Now, war in Nigeria is also ongoing. It started in 2009. This war is against jihadist rebel group Boko Haram. And the US, UK, Canada, France, and Israel are involved in that. Surprisingly, China and Iran are also involved in fighting the rebel group, even though they are often on opposing sides as far as the US and its Western allies are concerned. Thus, opponents fight alongside in certain wars and oppose each other in others, suggesting that a much more sinister plan is at work than different nations not understanding each other or fighting each other over resources. The greatest losers in all this seems to be the people of the nations where the war is fought, as it usually leads to extreme suffering for them. The war, which started in the Central African Republic in 2012, for example, between the government and rebels, has led to 1.1 million people being displaced. This is a country of only 5 million people, so this means that over 20% of the population was displaced, a great percentage of which sought refuge in neighboring countries. And here we see a map where we can see where the Central African Republic is between Chad and the DRC, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this nation the DRC is a very populous nation. It had 71 million people in 2015. It's the fourth most populous nation in Africa. The most populous actually Nigeria, which is here. Now, in 2011, 3 other wars started, which are still ongoing. The Sinai insurgency, in which Egypt and Israel have been battling Islamist terrorists. And we can see where the Sinai Peninsula is. The Syrian civil war, in which Western-sponsored rebels have tried to bring down a democratic leader who seems to be well liked by his people. And the war in Sudan between the government and rebels, and this one has displaced some 500,000 people. Now, in 2013, a war started in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So this very populous nation in Central Africa. And this war is between 2 ethnic groups, but it's fought mainly with arrows, axes, and machetes. But on the other hand, it has displaced some 650,000 people by the end of 2017. In 2013, civil war in Mozambique started again, which appears to be an extension of the civil war the country endured between 1972 and 1992. And I was born in Mozambique. I was in Mozambique until 1974. Now, in 2014, civil war started in Iraq and Libya, which seems to be the result of Western nations having removed the previous government, which was able to keep the various factions from fighting each other. Western involvement seems to also have led to the current ongoing conflict in the Ukraine by removing an elected leader which was pro-Russia from power and installing one with opposite views. Western powers have caused ethnic Russians in the Ukraine to rise up, leading to unrest and war. In 2015, war between 2 factions in Yemen started. This conflict is still ongoing. In 2016, war between the military and Buddhist populations in Myanmar against Muslim insurgents started and is ongoing. In 2017, an ongoing conflict in the African nation of Cameroon between the government and separatists also started. Also in 2017, Mozambique's northernmost province started battling against ISIS insurgents. The Mozambican government is being supported by Russia. And here's a map showing where Mozambique is. And it's bordered by South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, and north here is Tanzania. Most of the wars are being fought again because of Islamic terrorists, which seems to be sponsored by various Western nations. As indicated in Article 245, the seals of Revelation Seal 1, the fact that many peoples in various parts of the world have experienced their governments turning against them suggests that the first seal has been opened and the rider of the white horse has gone out to conquer. Now, these governments seem to have unleashed war in various parts of the world in order to subvert and destroy their own populations, using invaders masquerading as immigrants, and thus to fight their own people by purposely creating an environment in which people would kill each other. And as stated in Revelation 6 verse 3, where it says, and that they should kill one another. It is thus likely that the second seal has been opened for quite a few years now. In conclusion, the likely opening of Seal 1 and the unleashing of tyrannical governments with a desire to fight their own populations seems to have led to what the opening of Seal 2 is all about, and that is war and people killing one another. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.
Toxic
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist. And today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled Planet X, Gravity, and Zero Photons. Now, the Planet X system of stellar cores, which has invaded our solar system, is a system of stars and planets that have spent most of the energy reservoir they were formed with. This energy reservoir is in the form of unstable nuclei, which will decay during several billion-year time span and release energy in the form of photons. And you may look at Article 247 entitled The Effect of the Planet X System on the Earth for more details on that. This photon energy is absorbed by particles adjacent to where the unstable nucleus, which decayed, was, and is then shared with other particles so that this energy slowly percolates upwards towards the celestial object's outer layers, and thus powers the functioning of a living planet or star, allowing these objects to establish an electric field in their outer layers, which will in turn allow electric or lightning discharges and thus light emission to occur. As a result of that lightning, the lightning is extremely intense and frequent across the whole atmosphere of a star, but will only occur in small regions and from time to time in the atmosphere of a small planet, such as Earth. A star will in addition produce a solar wind and nebula rings or clouds around itself. These circular clouds produced by a star have been given the name of planetary nebula. And you may look at Article 254 entitled Planetary Nebula and Death of a Star. Here we see one of these planetary nebula. This one's called NGC 6369. And we see the circular pattern of clouds with the star at the center. And this is produced due to the star ejecting positive ions, which then accumulate at certain distances from the star. The heaviest nuclei will populate a cloud near the star, so somewhere close to the star, because they are more mass and cannot get as far from the star. And the lightest will populate the outer edges or the furthest clouds from the star. And now when these positive ions capture electrons, photons are given off, thus producing the beautiful colored pattern we see here. But once a star runs out of unstable nuclei in its core, it is no longer able to generate energy and it dies. In other words, it loses the ability to emit light and also the ability to produce nebula clouds. Since the amount of photon energy in a celestial object is related to the gravitational field it is able to generate, a dead object also has a very weak gravitational field and thus a very weak gravitational influence on other celestial objects and on its own matter. This relationship can be seen from the fact that stellar cores have a very low gravitational influence on the Sun. And you may look at Article 153 entitled Planet X, Escape Velocity and Gravity for more details. And this can be explained in terms of the gravitational constant, which is not actually a constant, but a varying quantity related to the photon energy contained in an object's particles. You may look at Article 210 entitled Stellar Core Gravity, Tidal, and G is not constant for more details on that. However, G will be approximately constant across one celestial object over a short period of time. Over long periods of time, and especially if the object is being affected by the stellar cores, G will decrease. And here we see one of the very large stellar cores that have invaded our solar system. This one is about 3 times the size of the Sun, and it was observed in a stereo core 2 image from September 13, 2017. Now, the presence of such massive objects in the inner solar system and in contact with the Sun's corona does not lead to any major and sudden disruption of the solar system, as we would expect if they had normal gravity. But this is actually because these objects have such weak gravitational influence. In other words, their G value is extremely low, and this is because they have very low photon energy or gravitational energy inside the particles that make them up. And this is why we can say that stellar cores are basically dead objects that can no longer generate gravitational energy in their cores. Now, the fact that gravity is related to photon energy, which is contained within the particles, comes from the observation that stars form planetary nebula clouds. And what is in these clouds is known from observing the elements in comet tails as comets move through different regions within the solar system. Comets gather material from their environments, and this material then goes into forming the comet's tail and coma. Comets have lighter elements in their tails and coma when far from the sun, and heavier elements when close to the sun. These observations were first made by James McKinney and are detailed in his book, Planet X, Comets and Earth Changes. The fact that comets are electrical in nature and discharge the sun's planetary nebula cloud structure, which can also be referred to as the solar capacity, is detailed in Article 169 entitled Planetary Formation, Comets to Planets, and in James McKinney's book. In addition, all celestial objects have positively charged interiors and negatively charged outer layers. This then requires that there be an interaction which causes positively and negatively charged particles to repel each other, thus opposing the electrostatic interaction. And here are some examples of objects in the universe. And we start with an atom, which have a positive inner core. The atoms have positive nuclei and electrons in their outer layer, which are negatively charged. So we exhibit this structure. So do galactic nuclei, quasars, stars, planets. They all have a positively charged core and a negative outer layer. And now this force, which must exist in order to separate positive from negative charges, is actually the gravitational interaction, which opposes the electrostatic interaction. If we only had an electrostatic interaction, then the negative outer layer would combine with the positive inner core, and we end up with just a neutral object, in terms of charge. So this means that there has to be a force that forces these charges, or the positively charged part of the object, to be separated from the negative charges. So there has to be a charge separation interaction. This is what I called it initially. And this is detailed in Article 181 entitled Stellar Cores and Deciphering Gravity. Then, since stars emit light as a result of electrical discharges, which then results in the appearance of particles and the ejection of these particles in the form of the solar wind and CMEs, and since these must be associated with light emission, it becomes necessary that photons split into particles of opposite charge. This is known to occur through the mechanism of particle-antiparticle creation. But what has never been explained before is that this process occurs because the particles existed within the photon before the splitting occurred, and the particles were forced out of the photon because of the influence of an electric field. In addition, these particles do not have antimass, only mass, and either positive or negative charge. Photons can split into different oppositely charged particles depending on the energy of the photon. And now, what is illustrated here is the different particle-antiparticle creation cases we can have depending on the energy or the minimum energy of a photon. So in the case of the minimum energy of this photon being 0.051 MeV, so it most likely will have a little more energy than 0.051. It will split into an electron-positron pair, as we see here. Most of the photon's energy will go into creating the mass of the two particles, and what is left will continue to exist as photon energy, but within the particles. Then what we have is an electron-positron pair, but the moment it moves out of the region of high electric field that caused the particles within the photon to split, then it recombines because of the fact that the low mass means that the gravitational repulsion between the two particles is not strong enough to overcome the electrostatic attraction, which is represented by the blue arrows, whilst the gravitational repulsion is represented by the green arrows. You can see they're all smaller than the arrows representing the electrostatic attraction. So because the electrostatic attraction is stronger, the particles recombine into a photon when the two particles move out of the region of high electric field. You cannot forget that the photon moves at the velocity of light, which is very fast, and when the electron and the positron emerge, they will continue to move close to the speed of light, although not quite, because they now have mass, and so they will quickly move out of the region of high electric field, and then they will recombine into a photon. Now, if the original photon has an energy of slightly above 940 MeV, it will split into an electron-proton pair, the rest of the energy then existing within the two particles. But now, because one of the particles is much more massive, the gravitational interaction is strong, as represented by the larger green arrows than we had there. The electrostatic attraction between the two is of the same strength because it's only determined by the charge of the particles, and we have the same charges in both cases. But because one is more massive, the gravitational repulsion is now stronger, and it's strong enough to keep the two particles separated so they don't recombine back into a photon. Now, the same thing will occur if we have a minimum photon energy of 1,880 MeV, which is about the opposite, twice as much as what we have here. Then what we get is an antiproton-proton pair. And then the gravitational repulsion will be even stronger, so they will not recombine into a photon. But this particle-antiparticle creation is very unlikely to occur because of the extreme high energy of the photon required. So we have the main case, which leads to the particles that we observe in the universe. Technically, we should be able to get an antiproton-positron pair, but because our universe seems to be made out of protons and electrons, that reaction is not likely to occur, and mostly we get a proton-electron pair coming out of the photon. Now, another way we can see that photons must contain two oppositely charged particles within them is through realizing that it explains the reason why intrinsic redshift is related to the age of a particle. Intrinsic redshift, and it's dependent on the age of an object, as well as the fact that it is quantized, was discovered by Halton Arp, and is discussed in his book, Seeing Red. In this book, Halton Arp meticulously details that redshift is mostly intrinsic and thus cannot be used to determine distance to an object, since there are many cases of high redshift objects connected by dust to low redshift objects, which falsifies the Big Bang model. Halton Arp also shows that the redshift of an object is dependent on its age. Intrinsic redshift and its dependence on the age of an object, as well as the fact that it is quantized, can be explained by photons splitting into particles, or in this case by the particles inside the photon only moving slightly apart without emerging from inside the photon, but splitting far enough apart to absorb some of the photon's energy and thus decreasing the photon's energy, which would have the effect of elongating its wavelength and thus causing it to be redshifted. And this is illustrated here. So we have a photon which has a proton and an electron within it, moving at the speed of light. And then when it moves through a region of high enough electric field, the two particles are influenced by the electric field and move slightly apart, and thus absorb some of the energy of the photon. And when some of the energy of the photon is absorbed, then its wavelength moves towards the red end of the spectrum. In other words, the photon is redshifted. Now, the redshift depends on the strength of the electric field generated by a celestial object, such as a quasar, which is a protogalaxy. The electric field generated by the object will decrease with the age of the object, as it is dependent on its gravitational energy, or photon energy, which is the photon energy contained within the particles that make up the object. The object will use up this gravitational energy to create matter out of which stars form. So it will decrease as the object ages and it creates more and more stars. The fact that the redshift, as Halton Arp found, is quantized, decreases in steps, which means it decreases in steps rather than continuously, indicates that photon energy is quantized. This means that there is one photon with energy E naught, which we will call the zero photon, and all photons in the universe are multiples or agglomerations of zero photons, which can be explained by the simple photon energy equation, En. So a normal photon is made up of discrete multiples of zero photons. So N is 1, 2, 3, etc. And E naught is the energy of a zero photon. So this is illustrated here, meaning that a photon is made up of a collection or an agglomeration of zero photons, each having the minimum energy of a zero photon, which is E naught. So in conclusion, astronomical observations carried out by James McKinney and Alton Arp, as well as more recent observations of stellar cores in the sun's corona, has led to an understanding of how gravity operates and what causes it. Both matter and gravity emerge from photons. Gravity can be thought of as a photon field because it exists as a direct consequence of photons splitting into two particles of opposite charge, and is dependent on photon energy existing within particles. Furthermore, the two particles had to first exist within a photon, and this explains Halton Arp's observations regarding intrinsic redshift, which is dependent on the age of a galaxy. The fact that redshift is quantized leads to the understanding that there is one minimum energy photon, the zero photon, and that all photons are made out of multiples or agglomerations of zero photons. And here are the references. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.